Donald Trump campaigned for re-election today in the Oval Office, sitting down, speaking to his base, talking about his family separation policy at the southern border. The president has been reportedly demanding that his administration resume that family separation policy, even though a court order prevents that policy.
We're not looking to do that, no. Thank you very much. But it brings a lot more people to the border. When you don't do it, it brings a lot more people to the border.
Joining us now is Julian Castro, presidential candidate, former Secretary of Housing and Urban Development in the Obama administration, and he's the former mayor of San Antonio, Texas. Julian Castro, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it. And I know that immigration reform is a major piece of your campaign, so I want to get to that right away. And your reaction to what the president was saying today in the Oval Office about family separation policy, blaming it on President Obama, blaming it on the administration that you worked for.
Well, you know, these are more lies from the president. And Lawrence, if folks will take a step back to a year ago, when the administration basically told us that if we would just be cruel enough as Americans to separate little children from their parents, that would deter more migrants from coming to our southern border. What we've seen is that this policy, this administration, have been a total failure on immigration, because now we have more people who have come. And so, you know, what I share with the president is that I believe in a border that is secure. I believe that our border is more secure than it's ever been. But whereas he wants you to choose cruelty, I want you to choose compassion. And that's what my People First immigration plan is about.
Is your immigration plan, would you call it your #1 agenda item as president? If you were elected president, would that be the first thing you'd be trying to do legislatively?
Well, it'd be one of the first things. The first thing I would do, actually, is to try and ensure that everybody has health care in this country, because I think that that's a lot of unfinished business from the Obama administration, and that this administration has tried to sabotage the Affordable Care Act. It's time for everybody to have health care in the United States. But the lesson of 2009, 2010, when it comes to immigration reform, is that we can't afford to wait. And I believe that on January 20th, 2021 at 12:01 p.m., we're going to have a Democratic president, a Democratic Senate, and a Democratic House. And so when it comes to immigration reform, we won't wait. We'll make sure that we can have a pathway to citizenship for undocumented immigrants who are here, who are working hard, who are simply trying to provide a better life for their families. We're going to end family detention. We need to increase the number of refugees that the United States takes in, and also do smart things like a Marshall Plan for Central America, so that people can find opportunity and safety in their home countries instead of having to knock on the door of the United States at the southern border.
You also mentioned health care. Are you one of the Democrats who's in favor of Medicare for all?
I believe in Medicare for all. I think it's time that everybody have access to Medicare. I am not categorically, against. I believe in the ability of folks who want their own private health insurance plan to have that. However, what I don't believe in is that the profit motive should ever stop somebody from getting the health care and the medication that they need when they need it. And so we need to make sure that everybody has access to Medicare. I
think we saw in the Attorney General's testimony today that he is, at least at this point, determined not to release the full Mueller report. With only a couple of years left on the clock of the Trump presidency, they might be able to run out the clock on this, and it might fall to the next president to decide whether to release the full Mueller report. If you are the next president, would you authorize the release of the full unredacted Mueller report?
Oh, you better believe it. The American people deserve to see that. And people are never going to believe that they've gotten the full truth on any of this until they see that report. As you know, Lawrence, and a lot of the folks who are watching, it would set new precedent if a report like this is not released, because reports that have dealt with the conduct of a president have routinely been released over the years. So, of course, I would release that report.
The other thing that's routinely been released about presidents are their tax returns, which they've always done voluntarily, even though the presidents themselves are always automatically under audit when they're releasing those tax returns publicly. H.R. 1, Democrats' #1 bill in the House of Representatives, requires presidential candidates to release 10 years of tax returns. Will you release 10 years of tax returns?
I will. I'm going to release 10 years of tax returns well before anybody actually gets to vote, so that they have enough time to digest that. I expect that my fellow colleagues that are running for president on the Democratic side are going to do that. The thing is that we don't have anything to hide, but apparently this president is so hell-bent against people seeing what's in his tax returns that he still has not released them. And I hope that Congress is able to get a hold of those tax returns. It seems like the language of the law dictates that the federal government, the Treasury Secretary, I think, has to give over those tax returns. The American people deserve to see them, but I certainly will release mine.
What's your actual timetable for doing it? Because all Americans have a timetable of they're required to file their tax returns by April 15th. It's looming large in their lives right now. It's a big issue among presidential candidates and the President of the United States. Can you give us a specific timetable for releasing your tax returns?
Yeah, I haven't set out a specific date, but certainly within the next couple of months, sure. In my head, what I've been thinking is that we would do that before the debates start in June, so that people would have the opportunity to get a look at them. That would include this year's tax returns. So yeah, plenty of time for people to digest them and to look at everybody else's who releases them. Again, like I said, I have nothing to hide. And if you have nothing to hide, then you should have no problem releasing those tax returns.
All right, we're going to squeeze in a break here. And when we come back, I'm going to ask you, and I've asked all the candidates this, what is the best idea you have heard from one of the other candidates for president this year? We're going to be back with Julian Castro's answer to that after this break. And we're back with former Housing and Urban Development Secretary and current presidential candidate Julian Castro. And Mr. Secretary, what is the best idea that you've heard from one of the other presidential candidates?
There are a lot of them, Lawrence, but I got to give props to Senator Warren, because as you know, and folks who watch your show know, she's come out with a whole bunch of great policies. And probably my favorite one has been on childcare, universal childcare, because anybody who has children, or if they are involved in the lives of their grandchildren, they know that childcare can be great value to allow parents to actually go and work and earn a living. It's also very expensive in a lot of places. In fact, in some places, it's as expensive as the first year of college. So if we could accomplish something like universal child care, that would be a tremendous benefit to families of every background all throughout the country. So I'm a fan of what she's put out on that.
And what about your position on the Green New Deal?
I like it. We don't have to choose between protecting our planet and growing our economy. We can create jobs in the new energy economy. Here in my neck of the woods in Texas, it's a great example of that. A lot of wind energy jobs, solar energy industry jobs. Investment in renewables not only makes sense to bring down carbon emissions and to protect our planet, but also, as Representative Ocasio-Cortez and others have pointed out, to actually create jobs in the 21st century. Now, what the Green New Deal looks like from concept to the negotiation that happens before it actually becomes reality, if it becomes reality, I think people can negotiate, but I like it.
And I want to get you to some foreign policy. What would you say, if you take a trip to Afghanistan, what would you say to our troops there?
That we're proud of them, that we believe in them, that we need an orderly withdrawal, and we look forward to bringing them home. We also want to make sure that we take care of them and their families when they're back, so that they can get good job opportunities and put the great skills that they got in the military to good use, afterward, that we will keep improving the VA so they have great health care, and also keep improving things like educational opportunities and housing opportunities, because what I want them to know is that our commitment to them is not done when they get back, that it's just starting.
What is the issue that you most want to talk about that we don't talk about? I mean, we are talking about some of the issues that I know are very important to you, like immigration, but I know that we don't always think of everything that the candidates care about. What do you think of the things that we're leaving out of this discussion that we should make sure we include?
Well, I mean, I know time is limited, and so oftentimes it really goes by the news of the day. But one of the things that I'd like to talk more about, for instance, is small business. Small businesses make up more than 70% of the jobs out there in our country and in most metro areas. And we get a lot of headlines about things like Amazon and other big corporations, but I believe in small business. And one of the things I look forward to doing during the course of the campaign is to releasing a plan on how I would make small business more successful. And we will hear more about that next time. Secretary Julian Castro, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it. Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on the button below for more from The Last Word and the rest of MSNBC.